spent 32 years fixing other people's broken things. Pipes, wiring, load-bearing beams that had been patched wrong by some contractor who charged twice what the job was worth. I built my business with my hands, literally. The calluses on my palms when I was 25 never fully went away, even after I moved from doing the work myself to running the crew. Then running 3 crews. Then running an operation that covered 4 counties and employed 41 people at its peak. Pemberton & Sons Contracting. The name was aspirational when I registered it. I didn't have sons yet. I just believed I would. And I believed they would want what I was building. I should have paid more attention to what I was actually building. My wife and I got married young. I was 23, she was 21. And we were the kind of in-love that you only really understand in retrospect. The kind that makes you ignore the ways a person's edges don't quite fit yours, because the feeling of being close to them is so good you stop noticing the friction. We had our son 2 years later. Good kid. Quiet. I used to take him to job sites on weekends when he was small. Put a little hard hat on him. Let him hand me things. He seemed to love it then. Somewhere along the way he stopped loving it. Somewhere along the way, he stopped loving it. Or maybe he just stopped loving me in the way sons sometimes do when they grow up and realize their fathers are ordinary men. He married when he was 29. I paid for the wedding. Not because anyone asked me to. Because that's who I was. I handed over $62,000 for a reception at a vineyard in the hill country that neither my son nor his wife had any personal connection to. They just liked the photos on the website. I wrote the check and I smiled in the pictures, and I told myself this was what fathers did. My daughter-in-law is a specific kind of woman. I don't say that meanly. I say it the way a contractor assesses a structure, neutrally, factually, with an eye toward what it can and cannot support. She is charming when she wants something. She is cold when she has already received it. Within 18 months of the wedding, she had quietly repositioned my son so that his primary loyalty was to her preferences, her family's calendar, her vision of what their life should look like. I watched it happen the way you watch a foundation settle. Gradual, almost invisible, until one day you notice the door frame is no longer square. My wife noticed it too, but she had her own ways of handling things. Mostly she didn't handle them. She managed. She smoothed. She made excuses for everyone and called it keeping the peace. And for a long time, I told myself that was just how she was wired, and I loved her anyway. I did love her. I want to be clear about that. For a long time, I genuinely did. 3 years ago, my son called to tell me they were expecting first grandchild. I was at a job site in Fredericksburg when the call came through. Standing in the middle of a framing inspection, and I had to step outside and sit on the tailgate of my truck because my eyes went in a direction I wasn't prepared for. I was going to be a grandfather. I called my wife immediately. She was happy too. Or she said she was. The baby came, a little girl, and for about 6 months, things felt like they used to feel. We were all in the same room together, and it meant something. I bought them a house, not gifted the down payment. I bought the house outright, put it in my son's name because I wanted them to have security. $240,000. Cash. My son thanked me once, briefly, in a text message. I'm not telling you this so you'll feel sorry for me. I'm telling you because you need to understand the arithmetic of what I had built and what I had given, so that what came next makes sense. Last April, my chest started doing something I didn't like. It started as a tightness, the kind you ignore the first few times because you're 63 years old and everything is a little tighter than it used to be. Then it became pressure. Then one morning in the 3rd week of April, I was sitting at my kitchen table drinking coffee and reading something on my phone, and it felt like someone had placed a 50-pound sandbag directly on my sternum and was slowly pressing down. I called my wife into the room. She was upstairs getting ready to go to her book club. She came down, looked at me, and said I probably had indigestion. I told her this didn't feel like indigestion. She told me I always assumed the worst. She left. I drove myself to the urgent care clinic 3 miles from my house. They put me on an EKG within 4 minutes of my arrival and called an ambulance within 10. The cardiologist on call used the phrase, significant cardiac event, and then later, you are a fortunate man. I had 2 stents placed that afternoon. My wife arrived at the hospital at 6:15 that evening. The procedure had been completed by 2. She told me she hadn't wanted to alarm anyone until she knew it was serious. I asked her what she had been doing between the time I left the house and 6:15. She said she'd finished getting ready, gone to book club, and then come straight to the hospital after she got the second call from the nurse. The second call. The nurse had called her twice. I lay there with 2 new stents in my heart and thought about that for a long time. My son visited the next afternoon. He was there for about 40 minutes. His wife did not come. She sent a text that said, "So glad you're okay, crazy timing, will come by soon." They did not come by soon. They did not come by soon. They did not come by at all during the 4 days I was inpatient. What they did do, on the 3rd night of my hospitalization, was host a gender reveal party at my son's house, the house I had purchased for their second pregnancy. My wife attended. She told me about it the next morning in a tone that suggested she expected me to be understanding about it. There were 60 people there, she said. The food was catered. My son had rented a cotton candy machine. I was 63 years old, 3 days out from a cardiac procedure, alone in a hospital room, listening to my wife describe a cotton candy machine. I didn't say anything. I had learned over the years that the most important moments are the ones where you stay quiet and just let the information land. I came home on a Thursday. My wife had stocked the refrigerator. She had done this in a way that communicated obligation rather than care. Everything my cardiologist had put on the restricted list was still in there, and a bag of apples and a container of low-sodium broth had been placed visibly at the front. She had covered her bases. She had not changed the sheets. For the next 2 weeks, I rested. I followed every instruction my cardiologist gave me. I walked 30 minutes a day. I took my medications. I ate correctly. I slept. And I thought, I am a man who has spent his entire adult life assessing structures. I know the difference between a problem that can be repaired and a problem that means the whole thing has to come down. I know how to read what a building is actually telling you versus what the last owner painted over to make it look fine. And lying in that bed, in those 2 weeks, I finally let myself read what my life had been telling me for years. My wife did not love me the way I had loved her. She loved the version of me that produced income and stability, and showed up when required. My son did not see me as a person. He saw me as a resource that had always been there and would presumably continue to be there. My daughter-in-law had never pretended otherwise. I am not a dramatic man. I do not make decisions in anger. But I am a contractor. I know how to plan. I called my attorney on a Tuesday morning. His name is not important. What is important is that he had been handling my business and personal legal matters for 19 years, and I trusted him completely. I told him I needed to make some changes. He did not ask me why. That's one of the things I've always appreciated about him. Over the following 6 weeks, I restructured everything. The business, which I had been discussing with my son about potentially transitioning to his management, was formally retained in my sole ownership with a new succession plan that directed it to a private sale in the event of my death or retirement. The house I had purchased for my son, I reviewed the deed. It was in his name. That I couldn't undo, and I didn't try. What I could do and did was stop the monthly transfer I had been quietly making into their joint account. $1,200 a month, every month, for 3 years. I had told myself it was to help with the grandchild. I stopped telling myself that. I closed the credit card I had been paying that my wife used for personal expenses. I did not tell her I was doing this. I moved the majority of my liquid assets into an account she did not have access to. I revised my will. I updated my insurance beneficiaries. I did all of this legally, calmly, and completely. And then I started making plans of a different kind. I had a friend from the trades, a man I'd known for 28 years who had retired to a piece of property outside of Kerrville, 12 acres. He'd been inviting me to come out and help him with a renovation project for the better part of a year. I called him and told him I was ready to take him up on it. I packed what I needed over the course of a weekend while my wife was visiting her sister. 2 bags of clothes, my tools, my medication, my laptop, the files I needed. I left the furniture. I left the artwork we'd picked out together at a gallery in Santa Fe. I left the espresso machine she'd given me for my birthday 6 years ago, which I had used every single morning since, in which she had never once touched. I left a note on the kitchen counter. It said, I had a cardiac procedure in April. I was alone for most of it. I've had time to think clearly since then. I've made some changes you'll notice soon. I don't have anger toward you. I have clarity. I wish you well. I drove out of that driveway at 6:40 on a Sunday morning, and I did not feel what I expected to feel. I expected grief or fear or the particular loneliness of a man who has dismantled his own life. Instead, I felt something that took me a few miles to identify. Relief. I spent the first 3 weeks in Kerrville rebuilding my friend's back porch and sleeping better than I had in years. I ate breakfast outside every morning. I talked to my attorney twice a week. I let the phone ring when numbers I recognized called it. My wife discovered the closed credit card on a Monday. I know this because my attorney received a call from her attorney on Tuesday. My son called me 6 times in 2 days, the last call leaving a voicemail in a tone I had never heard him use. Something between panic and fury. The voice of a man who has just realized that a resource he considered permanent is no longer available. My daughter-in-law sent me an email that was 3 paragraphs long and included the phrase, "After everything we've done for this family." I read it once and did not respond. Here's the thing about people who believe they are owed something. They are always genuinely shocked when the bill comes. The legal process took about 8 months in total. Divorce at 63 is not the same as divorce at 30. There is more to divide, more history, more paperwork, and the conversations are quieter and colder because everyone involved is too tired for performance. My wife hired a competent attorney, so did I. We settled without going to trial. The house we had lived in went to her. The business and my financial accounts remained mine. She received a fair settlement. I signed it without ceremony. My son had also retained an attorney to contest, he claimed, the changes I had made to my financial arrangements. This is where things became educational, because in the course of reviewing what he intended to challenge, his own attorney apparently discovered something my son had not mentioned. A business he had incorporated 14 months prior, funded in part by $11,000 that had passed through the joint account I had been subsidizing. A business that had taken on a small number of investors. Investors who were now asking questions about returns that had not materialized. I did not report my son. I did not have to. 2 of his investors were not patient men, and they had already begun that process on their own. I learned about this through my attorney, who told me in the measured tone of a man sharing information rather than opinion. I listened and I thanked him and I hung up. I called my son that evening. He answered on the second ring, which told me he was frightened. I told him I was not going to involve myself in his situation. I told him he needed to get an honest attorney and cooperate fully. I told him I would pay for his legal defense, once, up to a limit I specified, because he was my son, and regardless of what had happened between us, I did not want to watch him lose everything he had in a situation he could still navigate out of. I told him this offer was a one-time thing and came with no other strings. He started to say something about the house, about the monthly transfers, about everything he felt I owed him. I let him talk. When he was done, I said, "I paid for your wedding. I bought you a house. I sent you $1,200 every month for 3 years. I had a heart attack and you went to a party. We can call it even." He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, quietly, "I didn't know it was that serious." And I said, "I know. That's the problem. I live outside Kerrville now. I bought 12 acres of my own, a mile and a half from my friend's property. And I've been building a small house on it, not contracting it out, actually building it, with my own hands and a crew of 2 I trust. The work is slower than it used to be and my back lets me know about it, but there is something about putting something together correctly, from the ground up, that I had forgotten I needed. My granddaughter is 2.5 now. My son has been navigating his legal situation, and from what I understand, he is doing so honestly, which is all I asked of him. He brought the baby out to visit me last fall. We sat on the unfinished porch, and she fell asleep in my lap, and my son and I talked for the first time in a long time like 2 actual people. I don't know what my wife does now. I hope she is fine. I'm not going to tell you I have it all figured out. I don't. I'm 64 years old. I have 2 stents in my heart, and I live in a house I'm still building. Some mornings I drive out to the property line and stand there in the early light and think about all the years I spent maintaining a structure that was never as sound as I believed it was. But I also think about what my father told me once, when I was maybe 19 and had made a mess of a simple repair job. He walked over and looked at what I'd done, and he didn't say a word for a long moment. Then he said, "The good news about doing something wrong is that you now know exactly where to start over." I know exactly where to start over. The coffee out here is better than anything I made on that machine she gave me. The air is different. My chest doesn't hurt. I think that's enough. People ask me sometimes if I regret how things ended. I understand why they ask. From the outside, it looks like a man who blew up his own family, lost his marriage, estranged his son, sold off a life he spent 4 decades assembling. That's one way to read it. Here's another way. I spent 63 years building things correctly. Every structure I ever put up, I built to code. Not because someone was watching, but because I knew what happens when you cut corners. The corners always tell on themselves eventually. A wall that looks fine from across the room will show you the truth the moment you put weight on it. I put weight on my family, not deliberately. Life did it for me. 1 cardiac event, 4 days in a hospital bed, and I finally saw what the structure actually was. Not what I had wanted it to be. Not what I had told myself it was for years while I was writing checks and showing up and doing what fathers and husbands do. What it actually was. My son is not a bad person. I want to say that clearly because I believe it. He made choices that were short-sighted and, in some cases, dishonest. But those choices came from somewhere, and part of that somewhere is me. I built a world where money appeared when it was needed and problems got handled before he had to face them. I thought I was giving him security. What I was actually doing was teaching him that the floor would always hold no matter what he did to it. That's on me. What I've come to understand, sitting out here on 12 acres of hill country and watching the sun come up every morning, is that there is no such thing as a consequence-free arrangement. Every system runs on something. Ours ran on my willingness to absorb whatever it cost to keep the peace, financially, emotionally, physically. When I stopped absorbing it, the system couldn't hold. That's not cruelty. That's just physics. The hardest thing I've ever done wasn't the legal process. It wasn't driving away that Sunday morning, or signing the divorce papers, or listening to my son's voicemails. The hardest thing was sitting with the truth that I had participated in this for a long time. I'd seen the signs and chosen not to read them. That takes something from a person. Not innocence exactly, but a certain comfortable story about yourself. The story where you're just the good man who got taken advantage of. That story is easier than the one where you also made choices over years that allowed things to become what they became. Intelligence isn't knowing things. I've met plenty of educated men who couldn't find their way out of a bad situation because their pride wouldn't let them admit they were in one. Real intelligence is being willing to look at what's actually in front of you, even when it costs you something to see it. Integrity is what you do with what you see. I saw it. I waited too long. But when I finally let myself see it clearly, I acted in accordance with what I knew to be true. I didn't burn anything down. I didn't make threats. I made decisions. Careful. Legal. deliberate decisions, and I lived with them. My granddaughter fell asleep in my lap last October on an unfinished porch. That's the whole story, really. Everything else is just the path that got me to that porch. Build the right things. Maintain them honestly. And when something isn't holding, when you've checked it from every angle and the structure simply isn't sound, know the difference between a repair and a rebuild. I'm 64 years old and I'm rebuilding. Slowly. Correctly. This time, I know exactly what I'm putting weight on.